So again, welcome to our digital audience. The recording of today's program will be available at the LWVOC YouTube channel and our Hot Topic webpage. So if you want to get a recap of what I know will be an absolutely amazing discussion, you can check it out there. If everyone would please silence their cell phones. I give you everyone a moment. We want to make sure that we're able to hear all of our panelists. And with that, if everyone would stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our sponsors in the room. If you would please stand to be recognized. Our visionary sponsors, Jennifer and Phil Anderson. Our bronze sponsors, Lynn and David Barrelsman, as well as Voting Voices. Michelle Levy, Lori and Richard Wack, and Charlie Williams. If you are interested in becoming a sponsor, certainly helping us to do this work of educating voters and defending democracy, please see our Fund Development Chair and VP, Lee Rambo Kemp, the beautiful lady in the red glasses. And now I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our elected officials and anyone who has declared that they are running for office. If you would come to the podium, to my left, your right, to make a quick introduction. We ask that you please hold your applause until the last person speaks. Thank you. Oh, there's so many today. That's how you know it's going to be a good legislative debrief. The elected officials are in the room.
My name is Phil Anderson. I'm currently the mayor of Winter Park, and I've got a meeting today, a meeting in 2 weeks, and then I turn the gavel over 2 weeks after that. And it's been a pleasure to serve everybody here in Winter Park for the last 3 years, and thank you for really visiting with us. Thank you.
Phil, we miss you already.
Good morning. My name is Karen Castor-Dental, and I'm on the Orange County School Board, and I am currently running for the Orange County Supervisor of Elections. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jason Johnson. I am running for Seat 2 on the Winter Park City Commission.
Hello, my name is Robin Dellinger. I'm actually from Seminole County, and I'm running for School Board District 4. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Melissa Vickers, and I'm running for Public Defender in Orange and Osceola counties. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Vanos, and I'm running for Orange County School Board District 6.
Hi there, I'm Stephen Brown. I'm running for Group 43 of the Orange County Circuit Court.
Good morning and happy Women's History Month. My name is Wes Hodge and I am running for Orange County Supervisor of Elections.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Carlos Guillermo Smith, a former state representative, Democratic candidate for State Senate District 17.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Kelly Martinez-Semrad. I'm running for Orange County District 5 Commissioner. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Lori Wurtzel, and I'm currently serving as a Maitland City Council person.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Villascamani, and I'm so happy to not be in Tallahassee and to represent you in the state legislature. Welcome to the district. And of course, I'm running for my final term in the state house this year. And I want to give a quick shout out. I have 2 high school students with me who are shadowing me today. Please come say hi to them. We're over in the corner. The future is going to be fabulous with these young people in charge. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much to all of our elected officials and candidates for certainly engaging in our democracy in this way. Moving forward into the program, unfortunately, well, kind of fortunately, there will be no Hot Topics overtime today at the Winter Park Library because it is an early voting site. So if it is your site, I thank you, Wes. Please give it up for making sure that you get out to your polling place. If it is your voting site, if you're early voting, please make sure that we get to the polls. Early voting for the presidential preference primary runs through March 17th. So instead of Hot Topics overtime, go next door and vote and encourage someone to do so as well. Now, for our topic for today, running in place. Florida lawmaking takes a backseat to politics, which we see the results of every day in the newspaper, on the internet, and so we will talk about that a little bit further. The panel will discuss what happened in this year's legislature and why it matters to voters. Unlike last year, the legislature and governor largely steered clear of big controversial issues. I don't know about you, I felt little sighs of relief all the time, but there were plenty of smaller controversial issues, and so we'll discuss that today. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, the Honorable Frederick Lauten. Who currently works as a mediator and arbitrator at the law firm of Upchurch, Watson, White, and Max. He joined the firm in January 2020. He served as chief judge of the Ninth Judicial Circuit from 2014 to 2019. Judge Lauten served on the bench for 26 years. I think he deserves another round of applause for that one. And if I may say, Judge Lauten has been instrumental in growing the league's engagement with our legal community and how we educate our Orange County community on judges' races and things of that nature. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Judge Lauten to the podium.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. If I can take a moment of personal privilege, I want to recognize my former colleague, Judge Bob LeBlanc, who's here with us, who served on the bench with me. Thank you for being here. And I worked with Melissa Vickers when I was chief judge, when she at the time was chief assistant public defender, and she was a delight to work with. So I want to introduce you to our panelists. It's a distinguished group. Gender diverse, as you'll see in a moment. Dr. Aubrey Jewett, if you would come on up. Dr. Jewett is an internationally recognized expert on American and Florida politics. He's currently the assistant director and associate professor in the School of Politics, Security and International Affairs at the University of Central Florida. He is the co-founder of the Lou Fry Institute of Politics and Government at UCF, whose primary mission is civic education. And he's published numerous journals, articles, books, chapters, and scholarly books. And I think if you follow politics in Central Florida at all, you know Aubrey Jewett. Help me welcome Dr. Jewett, please. Next, we have Jason Garcia, who's one of Florida's leading investigative journalist and the publisher of Seeking Rents, a newsletter and podcast that explores the way businesses influence public policy. And Jason previously worked for the Orlando Sentinel. We're delighted to have him. Help me welcome, if you would, Jason Garcia. Thank you. And finally, we have Skyler Swisher, who is a reporter for the Orlando Sentinel, who covered this year's session of the Florida legislature, and he's been reporting on most of the hot kind of topic or hot button issues that affect Florida voters, including recent stories about Disney's legal and power struggles with the governor, abortion, and barring children under 16 from social media. Join me, please, in welcoming Skyler Swisher. So there's a common adage that you've maybe heard over your lifetime: when the legislature is session, lock up the men, women, children, and dogs. We want to add bears to the list this year, which we'll explain to you in just a moment. For some of you, you may remember that last year, former Chief Justice Charlie Wells indicated that the Florida Supreme Court would be bound by precedent to find that Florida's explicit privacy clause in its Constitution protected a woman's right to choose. I'm a tremendous fan of Chief Justice Wells, but I was, shall we say, just a little skeptical that the court would go in that direction. Well, and we still don't know what the court's going to decide in terms of the 6-week abortion ban case or the proposed constitutional amendment addressing reproductive rights. So I'm going to sort of throw this open to the panel. What, if anything, did the legislature do this year with reproductive right issues? And also, I invite you to comment, if you would like to in any way, about the cases that are pending before the court and what you think its impact has had politically on the state. And we'll go from my left all the way right. So, Skyler, you're up.
Yeah, so the answer to that is not a lot on abortion this session. There was a near total abortion ban that's even more restrictive than the 6-week abortion ban. That did not get a hearing. There was also a bill that was closely watched that would add, in the bill sponsor's words, an unborn child to the wrongful death statute. This bill basically got stopped in its tracks, and there's a reason why, and that's Alabama. The Alabama State Supreme Court had a very high-profile ruling that a frozen embryo is a child. This bill would have defined an unborn child basically from the moment of fertilization. It did specify it had to be in the womb, but the thinking is that particular ruling really stopped that bill from moving forward.
Great. Jason.
Yeah, I think someone mentioned in the intro that there wasn't as many controversial issues. Some of that was because things that were controversial got sort of stopped by their own extremism, right? When people realize what it means to declare an unborn child a child under the law, right? And this bill was particularly interesting because there's a lot of folks that thought this was a preemptive ploy to get in front of the abortion amendment by creating essentially a cause or a legal right in statute that a judge could use to sort of counteract the abortion amendment should it pass, And what was interesting about this too, the other point I wanted to make is, we saw like an extreme interpretation out of Alabama that a frozen embryo in a test tube is a child under a fetal personhood law. But we're starting to see, folks that have been appointed with these views are starting to take those positions. And another place, in Florida, we have another, you mentioned there's a couple of abortion cases. We're waiting on a ruling on the 6-week ban. We're waiting on a ruling on whether the abortion amendment can go on the ballot. But there's actually another case, and I believe it's headed to the Florida Supreme Court now, about whether or not the parental bypass in the state's the judicial bypass in the state's parental consent law for abortion, whether or not that is legal at all, right? There's going to be a decision that might revoke the ability of any minor to go around, a hostile parent or guardian, even through the courts. So there's a lot happening here, even though the legislature, sort of tripped over its own shoelaces because of Alabama.
So the hot button issues are really in front of the court right now, as opposed to the legislature's up. Dr. Jewett.
Yeah, and since my colleagues didn't talk quite so much about those two cases, I'll speculate. I'll predict. I am reluctant to go against the esteemed Charlie Wells, but I would suggest that there's about a 90% plus possibility that the Florida Supreme Court will uphold the 15-week abortion ban and they'll overturn the precedent that we had. I think partly because of who's on the court. You know, Governor DeSantis has appointed 5 of those 7. He's actually gotten to appoint 7, but 2 got moved up to the Fed. So he's appointed, I haven't looked it up, but I'm pretty sure he's appointed more than any modern governor. And when he made those appointments, most of them were done to ensure, if not an outcome, at least ensure a certain type of judicial decision making. Almost everybody that he's appointed has been a member of the Federalist Society. And so it just seems to me that based on the questions they ask and oral arguments, that's what's going to happen. On the constitutional amendments, the initiative petition, I put that at about 50-50. I was actually a little more heartened after I heard some of the discussion by some of the judges or justices. So, I mean, I don't think, I wouldn't put a lot of money on it, but I think there's at least a chance that that'll be approved and the voters will have a chance to weigh in on that in the fall. We'll see, of course.
Great. Well, if I may, let's stick with social legislation for just a little bit. Last year, Governor DeSantis, or last year's session, he knew he was running for president, and so the legislature, maybe at his direction, was quite active in the social legislation and in sort of cultural war area. And I guess last year the word of the year was woke. So what about this year's session in the field of social legislation, since we started with reproductive rights? Skyler, let me start with you. What about the social media bill, and then we can hop around a bit?
Yeah, so I can kind of start off with the social media bill. This was one of the top priorities of the House Speaker, Paul Renner. And the initial version would have essentially banned children younger than 16 from being on social media. Problem is it ran into the legislature's own parental rights movement. They've been very strong on that. It also ran into the governor, who was like, well, he thinks that the parents should, have a say on this issue. So he ended up vetoing the bill. It came back. It was revised. So now it's a ban for 14 and under. And then for 14 and 15-year-olds, the parents can opt in to have their children on social media. It's worth noting that this is likely going to result in a lawsuit from a group called Net Choice, which includes some of the biggest social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Their argument is that this is unconstitutional.
Great, Jason.
Yeah, and this is actually another place where I'll push back a little against this idea that they didn't do a lot as much controversial this year. If you think back just the last couple of years, 4 of the most controversial laws they have passed. There's the Stop Woke Act, which attempts to limit discussions and teachings of racism and sexism. There was a terrible anti-union bill, anti-public sector union bill last year. There was I think a lot of activists called it the Death Star preemption bill that essentially empowered businesses to sue local governments to block ordinances they don't like. And there was Senate Bill 1718, which was this sort of really anti-immigrant, hostile immigrant bill that they passed last year that was frankly blamed for a lot of the workforce shortages we're seeing now in this year, leading to rolling back child labor laws. But all 4 of those bills were expanded this session. They expanded the Stop Woke Act into educator preparation programs. They expanded Senate Bill 718 to ban local governments from even recognizing community IDs. They expanded the anti-union bill to impose even more like paperwork requirements on teachers unions. And I think I see McKenna Schuler here from the Weekly. She's done some incredible reporting on the expansion of the anti-union bill. And then on the Death Star preemption bill, they expanded that again to now allow developers to sue to block land development regulations they don't like. So all of these passed. I think the main difference was you didn't have Ron DeSantis in the state holding a press conference every day talking about them. He was off in Iowa talking about them.
Dr. Jewett.
Yeah, and I don't totally disagree with that take, Jason. I do think part of it was a perception because Governor DeSantis was not the head cheerleader on all these things, and plus he didn't lay out a big agenda for the legislature ahead of time. But I will say that it seems as if at least some of the things that were could be described as woke or very conservative social legislation, I think they were stopped, right? And so that is something, right? The governor and the conservative Republicans didn't get everything. And, you know, some of them were self-inflicted wounds, like the bill that would say you couldn't take down Confederate memorials. That looked like maybe it was going to pass, but then they had a committee hearing and they had several people made comments that were really white supremacist kinds of comments. So much to the fact that some of the supporters of the bill said, no, I'm thinking about voting against it just because you said that. And then the Senate president stepped in and said, yeah, absolutely, we're not taking up that particular bill. Or there was the thought of the anti-LGBT legislation that seemed to be targeting LGBTQ rainbow flags on government buildings, and that one, you know, didn't pass. One that would have allowed open carry, right? I mean, the open carry folks still want that, but that still didn't go through. And you had already mentioned, I think somebody mentioned in the first round, the a bill that would have even been more strict on abortion, basically only allowing an abortion when the life of the mother was at stake, and that one didn't go forward either. So there was at least some that didn't get through.
Yeah, do you think when they die, they don't die a complete death, that they might resurface? I mean, is this a preview of what's to come in terms of guns?
They all might be back. What was that horror movie? They're back.
Yeah.
So
I'll just say one thing you learn from covering the legislature over years is like this year's extreme idea that doesn't go anywhere is like 3 years from now. That's the main fight of session.
Yeah, and I'll just add quickly, I did some reporting where I talked to some of these like kind of far right Republicans. They were upset. They were disappointed. You know, they were like, the Republicans in the legislature are governing like Democrats. So they're going to be turning the heat up in these primaries on Republicans because they're saying they're not going far enough.
So they're sort of zombie bills. They don't really ever really die. They just rest for a while. When I was a kid, when I was a high school student, which was, you know, in a different era entirely, I had to take a course called Americanism versus Communism. And now it's like deja vu all over again. Who wants to take that one? Aubrey?
I guess I'm the resident communist.
I didn't quite mean it that way.
Or expert, anyway, no. Yeah, I mean, mostly I think this is, you know, political virtue signaling, whatever you want to call it. The thought that we're going to teach kindergartners or first graders about Karl Marx and the rise of the proletariats, and, you know, it seems a little far-fetched, but, you know, maybe we can come up with a good picture book. Maybe, you know. You know, in all seriousness, I think that there is a thought amongst a lot of conservative Republican legislators that, particularly among the younger generation, there is an affinity for socialism, at least, if not communism, and so they're concerned about that. And so, in a more neutral way, I'll say, you know, I think that's what this is trying to address, the thought that a lot of younger folks are a little more predisposed to socialism than capitalism, so they're trying to nip that in the bud all the way down to, you know, kindergarten, I guess.
I didn't really pick a college professor to talk about this topic on purpose, but so bear with me. Go ahead, Jason.
I just wanted to add, there's like some real political strategy to those sorts of bills too, because what you're seeing happen is there'll be an effort to sort of politicize a term or weaponize a term like cultural Marxism or groomers is another one, and you use that over and over and you turn that into a political weapon, you know, not by misapplying it, but then you turn around and you pass a law targeting the original thing. So something to do, we just want to teach kids about communism, why they're bad, or we want to outlaw grooming and stuff, except it's all layered in now where it's like a political attack as much as it is actually changing like a law, like an education policy or a criminal justice statute. So it is that is part of what makes these so controversial, is a bunch of people realize like, oh no, you're elevating your political attacks with these. That's what these bills are designed to do.
Before we leave this sort of cultural war, stop woke, I mean, did anybody want to talk about the settlement yesterday on appeal in the last year's Stop Woke Act? Anybody want to take that one?
Yeah. That was an interesting one in that you've got the DeSantis administration sort of preemptively trying to declare victory because the statute, because the case is being settled, except they are clarifying, you know, that what this law does, the big problem with parental rights in education or the Don't Say Gay bill, it was incredibly vague, right? It said you can't do instruction on sexual orientation, and what does that mean, right? That's where the name Don't Say Gay came from and why it caught root. And so now they're actually going to send directions to all schools around the state that you can actually talk about sexual orientation in class. You can have discussions about that sort of thing, right? And so if Ron DeSantis wants to sort of claim that's a victory, I would love to know how he feels about a headline that says, Ron DeSantis tells Florida public school teachers it's okay to talk about being gay in class, right? That doesn't sound like a victory for him to me.
Look, I didn't have to mediate today, so I was thinking about sleeping in a little bit, because this didn't start till lunchtime. But then my neighbor woke me up with her leaf blower, and you know what I thought? I thought, can't somebody do something about this infernal noise? Because I can't sleep. So I called my county commissioner. I called the city commissioner, and to my utter surprise, the response I got is, hey, my hands are tied. So who wants to take the preemption issue on? Skyler, you want to start? Or
On the leaf blowers?
I mean,
I
let's
noticed we
face
have the
it,
mayor
that
here.
is
Maybe
the
he
most
can give us the
critical
tea
issue
on this.
facing society. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, so yeah, Winter Park, from my recollection, passed an ordinance in 2022 that was to go into effect on July 1st of this year, banning gas-powered leaf blowers. Then kind of at the late in the process, there was a budget language inserted into the budget to essentially preempt the voters from being able to weigh in on this issue. So yeah, there's a lot of criticism. Like, once again, you have the legislature taking away authority from cities and from local voters to decide, what do they think the best policies are for their community. Also, as part of this, there's $100,000 going to study the issue of leaf blowers. And that was kind of the mechanism that was used to essentially bypass the normal process and to get this preemption passed.
So we're having a little fun with the leaf blower issue, but let's talk seriously about preemption in some other areas that are very serious areas. So Jason, I don't know if you want to take it, or Aubrey, but why don't we work our way down?
Yeah, I'll start just because it's a long laundry list, right? So they preempted living wages. They preempted predictive scheduling ordinances. They preempted prevailing wage ordinances, which apply to contractors. They preempted local governments from regulating any aspect of electric vehicle charging stations. They preempted local governments from regulating any aspect of natural gas storage facilities. They even preempted local governments from regulating electric fences, which came out of a fight out of Orlando where a company that makes electric fences was not happy with the city's restrictions on where you could build them in residential areas. So they got the legislature to preempt cities from regulating electric fences, right? This goes on and on. We mentioned they expanded the Death Star preemption. I actually just did a list of this with somebody else. They also preempted vacation rentals. You can't regulate Airbnb locally anymore. You can't they preempted regulation of food delivery platforms. You can't regulate Uber Eats. I mean, it did not stop. And to Skyler's point, one of the issues one of the things they're doing procedurally now is they're sitting on these, so you don't see them in public. You can't sort of prepare for them, and they wait until budget negotiations. This is a process in the legislature called budget conference. It is the most opaque, secretive, mysterious process in the whole legislature, and they unearth a bunch of preemptions right then, and they attach them to a line item in the budget. They come up with $100,000 for some stupid study, but that allows them to write a law in a budget-related bill that says you can't do anything for the next year about this, and that's one of the ways they get around. A bunch of people in Winter Park would have had plenty to say if they'd been holding hearings on a gas blower preemption, but this way, by the time it surfaced, it was already a done deal.
So, Aubrey, we were talking a minute ago about the small R Republican theory of smaller, closer to home government is the best, and yet you get this preemption issue, and why don't you share your thoughts with the group about that?
Yeah, the judge and I were talking at lunch. And, when I first started teaching at UCF back in 1995, when I taught American government, I used to use a supplementary text called Revolution at the Roots, which was all about the Republican conservative movement to devolve power down to state and local governments because those local governments were closer to the people and those were the ones that you should trust, and it allowed for more variation depending on where you were. But it seems that maybe that's only a great idea if you're not the party in power. Because, like, for instance, Congress was controlled by Democrats from like 1950 to 1994. Or, of course, in Florida, up until about 92, 4, 6, in that area, when Republicans took the legislature, Democrats were in charge. So it sort of seems, if one were a little cynical, that now once that you're in power, you want to impose your thought on how everything should be statewide, despite the diversity of the state, the political, the geographic diversity. And so, yeah, it just seems that there's an attempt to standardize things rather than allowing locals to choose their own path. And, you know, even right here in Orange County, you were mentioning some of the things. There was one about controlling growth management that's going to only really specifically affect an Orange County decision on a huge property that wants to be developed in a rural area, just as an example. Or the ethics commissions. I think we're going to talk about that later too, but there was just a number of things that were just taken away from local government.
Well, every time the legislature is in session, I learn things that I should have known, but I didn't know. And last year, one of them was apparently the state of Texas needed our planes and our National Guard to address border crossings that had some kind of immediate impact on Floridians. Did the legislature do anything in the area of immigration this year? Aubrey, you want to start with that one, and then we'll come over to Skyler?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I saw that was specifically about immigrants or immigration in the state was no longer can local governments issue community IDs. And particularly down in South Florida, I think Miami-Dade, they were issuing local identification to residents who didn't otherwise have legal ID, so that if they had interactions with the police or something like that, they would at least have something to show where they live, their name, that sort of thing. But according to Florida law now, that's no longer going to be allowed. You know, again, this is sort of one of those things where Jason was talking about, you know, compared to last year when there was several measures that were really going after people in the state without, you know, legal paperwork. This year, maybe there wasn't quite as much. I'll just add on the deployment of, you know, Florida troopers and troops to the Texas border. You know, that, again, seems pretty much performative politics. It seemed mostly designed to help Governor DeSantis stay in the news cycle. I do understand a lot of Americans, according to polls, not just Republicans, a lot of Americans, including Democrats, are concerned about the immigration situation at the border. But it does make me, you know, wonder, particularly with this new state guard, when state law seems to indicate that the state guard can only be deployed in the state of Florida, that they're talking about deploying them to the Texas border. Although, of course, maybe they changed the law when I didn't see it here in the last day or two. But
Skyler, did you want to?
Yeah, just to kind of expand on that a little bit. You know, one of the things we've been kind of watching, if you're a political junkie, is like, is the legislature going to start pushing back against Governor DeSantis? Because, you know, he's thrown millions of dollars into his little pet projects, and the legislature essentially just cut him a blank check. So one of the things that happened that's kind of interesting this year is with those migrant flights, he wanted $5 million additional. The legislature said, no, you can keep the remaining funds that you haven't spent. It's around $9 million. He did get money for, you know, his state guard. He got some money for New College. That's the college that he took over in this kind of trying to make into like a conservative Hillsdale College of Florida, sort of. So they gave him less funding for those initiatives, and they also said, hey, we want to see reports on like how the money's being spent, like what are these programs doing, things that you would kind of expect the legislature to do. So it does seem like he's getting at least a little bit of you know, pushback from the legislature on some of his budget priorities.
So let's just talk about that for a second. Who wants to take, Aubrey, you want to take?
For some of the pushback?
Yeah, on the pushback. The relation. Let's talk about the power relationship, Speaker, President of the Senate. governor, the whole relationship between the governor and the legislature?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, over the last few years, most political observers of Florida really think that Governor DeSantis has been one of the most powerful governors that we have seen. If you look at the institutional and structural powers of a Florida executive, they're actually a little bit less than in a lot of other states, at least on paper. But Governor DeSantis was able to leverage every tool at his disposal and really go beyond what traditional political norms are. In other words, they weren't laws or rules, but they were things that just hadn't been done in the past because people thought, well, that just wouldn't be the right thing to do. And so he was really quite powerful. But that has changed a little bit, it seems. I don't want to say he's not powerful. He's still governor. He's still got the power in the line item veto and some other things. But, he doesn't have $100 million in the Political Action Committee anymore. He was defeated in the Republican primary, so that's sort of the bloom is off the rose a little bit amongst a number of Republicans. And, of course, he's term limited out, so he's already a lame duck governor. So I think for a variety of reasons, he's not going to be as powerful over his last 3 years as he seemed to be in the previous 3.
Jason?
Yeah, I think it is indisputable that Ron DeSantis is diminished in Tallahassee right now. And I'll just give you a handful of data points to sort of show that. There is a sort of controversial civics program that the DeSantis administration created with the help of Hillsdale College and the Heritage Foundation, where teachers get $3,000 stipends if they go through this weekend-long sort of program. He wanted $45 million for that program. The legislature gave him $10 million. He wanted more than $50 million in new money for the Florida State Guard. The legislature gave him less than $20 million. Like Skyler said, he wanted $5 million for his migrant kidnapping program. He got no new money for that, right? He had written a bill sort of to a point that Aubrey had mentioned. It's sort of ambiguous in state law right now where exactly he's supposed to be able to send the Florida State Guard. He had written himself a law, or his staff had written a law that basically gave him unlimited authority to activate the State Guard in any situation, any location. That bill was killed. That bill was completely withdrawn. And then just to go back to House Bill 1, I think we probably shouldn't overlook how remarkable it is that the legislature sent him a bill in session that he said he did not like. And so the significance of that is you send the governor a bill in session, he has to make a decision within a week. He has to turn it around before, and while you're still in session and before you finalize the budget, it means he's got now a lot less power because he's got to be thinking about whether or not you're going to fund his stuff, whether or not you're going to override him. And what they got out of that is he did veto the bill, but he also then committed to signing the compromise. So they essentially backed him into the corner and got him to sign off on a social media ban that without, that would have been unthinkable a year ago to challenge DeSantis in that way.
There's so much to cover that gets a little challenging, but I know this is an issue that's important to Floridians, so can we talk for a minute about property insurance and what, if anything, happened with the legislature?
Yeah, folks are going to save about $50. That's what happened. I'm not joking. And then like a bunch of second homeowners are about to get screwed, essentially. They did two main things on property insurance this year. One is they passed a tax break on, it essentially affects the taxes and assessments that are on property insurance policies. It averages out to $55 a saving on a residential policy, but that's on all policies. That's like a $10 million home policy is going to see at the same. So the average savings is $55. Most folks are going to save a lot less than $55. And the second big thing they did was they allowed what are known as surplus lines insurance companies. And surplus lines insurance companies are essentially unregulated by the state. So they charge much higher prices. They don't have the same protections. If they go out of business, your claim doesn't get paid. It's not guaranteed in that way. But they're going to let surplus lines insurers pull people out of Citizens, the state-run insurance program, regardless of whether or not people want to go. So there's a bunch of second homeowners that are in for a super rude awakening soon. Now, with all that said, I will say, probably, to my mind, the single most optimistic thing that happened in session is there is a bipartisan push to create essentially a genuine public option for hurricane insurance in Florida, windstorm insurance. This is an idea that this idea has been around for like 15 years now. People on both sides of the aisle have been talking about it. It's been done in other states, including Texas and California, not for hurricane insurance, but for different kinds of disaster insurance. This is the sort of idea the insurance industry detests for obvious reasons. this bill was filed, which alone is a big deal, but they did give it a hearing, right? I mean, it was 30 minutes, and they cut it off right at 30 minutes, even though they had more time to go. But the fact that they were willing to allow that conversation to start it gives you a sense that, like, even Florida legislators are starting to realize, like, the stuff we're doing is not working. So I think that is a good thing, but, you know, that's still years away from actually becoming law if it ever does.
Skyler, anything else in the tax relief area that happened up there that's worth discussing?
Well, one thing that the governor has talked about in terms of tax relief is brakes on tolls. You know, there's, I think, around $400 million for frequent commuters that they'll get a break on their tolls. So that's one of the things that he was really trumpeting. But, you know, as Jason mentioned, nothing really meaningful on property insurance. You know, and I put this question to the Republican Party chairman. I'm like, what do you tell voters, you know, whose property insurance rates are skyrocketing? And he said, you got to be patient. You know, they did a lot of legislation in 2022 and 23. And he's saying that, hey, it takes time, and this is going to cut down on the excessive litigation that he says is driving up the cost.
How about the area of prisons? I mean, you know, one year it's a hot topic, one year you don't hear anything, kind of cyclical. What about this year? Anything in that area?
Yeah, I can talk about prisons because I did an interview with former state senator Jeffrey Brandis. This was a big issue of his. You know, the state hired an auditing firm, and they came up with a projection that over the next 20 years, it's going to take $6 to $12 billion to address the shortcomings in the prison system, and it's not in good shape at all. I mean, you don't have air conditioning in there. You have the state National Guard having to fill in because there's such a shortage of corrections officers. And so the amount of money that the legislature put in is around, I think, $120 million. So, you know, that's not enough to address the needs that exist in the prison system right now.
Yeah, and I'll just add, this is a frustrating issue because it's one of these issues where, like, performative politics often gets in the way. So you'll see a lot of legislators dunking on Twitter about how I don't care about putting air conditioning in prisons and stuff, and they refuse to sort of spend money because they feel like that makes them look weak or something like that. Except it is costing all of us money because, to Skyler's point, we're putting National Guardsmen in prisons right now, and we're spending $20 million just on that next year because prisons are so understaffed, because they're such horrible places to work. And the big issue, they did put a bunch of new money into construction this year. I think it was, like you said, about $100 million recurring, but they did not give the Department of Corrections the authority to bond the money. And that's what the big fight is here, is to be able to build new prisons and do substantial construction, you're going to need to be able to bond that money, and they refuse to give them that power this year.
Aubrey.
And then just two things, one on tax relief, one on prisons. Floridians have really gotten used to the idea of sales tax holidays. Most economists don't think that they're a great idea for either raising taxes or stimulating the economy, but nonetheless, the legislators like it because then they can claim that they cut taxes, and the public likes it because, you know, it is, at least for a little bit, cutting taxes, and businesses like it because they can sort of tie it into a sales. So we are going to have those once again. I mean, I think there's going to be like 2 back-to-school shopping tax holidays, you know, hurricane preparedness, and then I think there's another one like camping or something.
Yeah, one of the interesting things on the sales tax holidays, and Aubrey is exactly right, that, like, from an economics perspective, they're really sort of dumb, but they're very politically popular. But they cut those way back this year. So last year they did 4 weeks of back-to-school sales tax holidays over 2 different holidays. This year they're only doing 2. Last year they did a 3-month Freedom Summer sales tax holiday. That's where basically camping, fishing, hunting equipment, and then tickets to events are all tax-free. This year that's going to be 1 month. And on the hurricane, they do these hurricane supplies tax holidays right at the start of the hurricane season, then right before the peak of it. They cut that way back this year. Last year they made sure that, like, basic household supplies like paper towels, Kleenex, dish soap, hand sanitizer, all that was taxed. All of that stuff got cut out this year. So these tax holidays are about half the size of what they were last year, but nobody in the legislature is really talking about that.
We talked a little bit about the dynamics, you know, the relationships between the governor and the legislature, but I'd like to talk, and Skyler, I'd like you to start on this one, about the current leadership, President of the Senate, Speaker of the House, and next year's President of the Senate, President of the Senate, Speaker of the House, and sort of the dynamic. What do you sort of predict will be the areas of interest for the incoming leadership? And if you want to talk about this year's leadership, I invite you to do that too.
Sure, and also just real quick, back on the property insurance, they did put $200 million into my Safe Florida home, and that's going to be targeted toward low and moderate income seniors. That's to make like improvements, storm hardening, which can lower your insurance rates.
Great.
But talking about the incoming leadership, so on the Senate side, we have Senator Ben Albritton. He comes from a very rural district. He's gotten quite a bit of money from the sugar industry. You know, it seems like agriculture is going to be a big focus for him. So one of the things to watch with him will be, what does he do on environmental policy? Is he going to try to sneak something through that could potentially harm the Everglades restoration? On the House side, it's a person from Miami, Danny Perez. Something that stood out to me is there was an interview that he did with reporters there in Tallahassee. And he said, you know, he likes to go around and knock on doors, talk to people in his district, and they asked him, well, what are you hearing? And he said, it's not even close, it's just property insurance. So, you know, according to him, he's envisioning that the legislature is going to work on this issue. So it'll be interesting to see him and watch whether there's going to be additional legislation that comes forward on property insurance.
Yeah, and then if you ever hear a Florida legislator tell you they solved the insurance crisis by putting more money into a home hardening grant program that is essentially like trying to shovel a driveway one snowflake at a time, it's not a solution. In terms of what to look for next year, I think there are three things that come to mind for me. Ben Albritton, like you said, is very notoriously close with the agriculture industry, big ag particularly. He ran for House Speaker a number of years ago. His campaign was entirely financed by the agriculture industry. And where that might show up is, you know, there has been an enormous fight in South Florida for the last few years between the sugar industry and both Everglades activists and then folks who live along the two rivers down there about how to manage the water levels in Lake Okeechobee. I think there's a real chance you'll see the legislature try and sort of tip the scales there in the sugar industry's favor. The other company that Ben Albritton is pretty notoriously close with is Mosaic, the phosphate miner and fertilizer manufacturer. So there's a piece of legislation that Mosaic has been lobbying hard for that would essentially weaken liability standards for corporate polluters. Essentially, there's a law in the books that makes it easier to hold corporate polluters accountable for any damage they cause when they release pollution into the environment. Mosaic is leading a push to try and weaken that law. I think that will be a big thing to watch next session. The third thing, Danny Perez, he's from Miami. Interesting, he's also was the national board chairman of ALEC, so you sort of figure ALEC has already had plenty of influence in the Florida legislature, but probably going to be at a peak next year. But he is from Miami, and historically, Miami Republicans have been very pro-Citizens because it's basically the only place a lot of folks in Miami can get insurance, and Citizens, again, is the state-run insurance company. So this idea of an expanded Citizens, or maybe even going to a true public option for hurricane insurance. Again, I would not expect it to pass next year, but I would not be surprised if it gets more of a discussion, even more of a hearing, maybe even a committee vote next year.
All right, I'm going to go to my favorite question. I'll just work from left to right. What was, in your opinion, the best piece of legislation that was adopted this year and the worst? All right, or maybe we'll start at the far end. Well, I can start with Skyler if you want.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
Kidding. Well, the best. We had talked about this a little bit earlier. Maybe the Dozier reparations bill for all those poor young people who are now much older, who were abused, sexually abused, beaten, etc. Many decades ago. So maybe that might be up there. There's an across-the-board raise for state employees. It doesn't affect professors, so I'm not saying it's because for me, but I think those hardworking state employees who for a decade only got a handful of raises, this will be the third year in a row they get at least some raise to try to keep up with inflation, so I think that's pretty good. And then one other one I thought was really actually quite good. Again, it's sort of a small thing, but it allows pharmacists to dispense HIV medications within 72 hours if somebody thinks that they've been exposed to HIV. So I think that's a really positive step in the right direction. The worst, I think, was the preemption bill that said that local governments can't establish worker regulations for heat, like Miami had. So, I mean, this is literally potentially going to kill people. We do know that one worker who was already in the news was died out in the fields the first day that he worked. And so the thought that you would stop local areas, particularly in a big state like Florida, like Miami might need, or South Florida might need different regulations than Central or North Florida. I mean, I really think that was a terrible, I mean, I wasn't in favor of most of preemption, but I thought that was just a terrible one because it risked people's lives.
Yeah, best bill, in my opinion, they passed a piece of legislation expanding the state's school readiness program. This is one of the more important safety nets we have for low-income workers. It provides subsidies for childcare so folks can work for folks who otherwise could not afford childcare and then thus could not afford to work. There's a big issue where as you reach the income limits, your benefit goes away. So suddenly you find people deterred from taking promotions or applying for higher paying jobs because the raise they get, maybe they get a 5% raise, won't offset the loss of their child care subsidy. So they passed a bill to address that benefits cliff issue. I think that's a really good thing. Interestingly, that bill was lobbied for by the Florida Chamber of Commerce, one of the state's biggest business lobbying groups. And I mention that because the absolute worst bill they passed this year was also written by the Florida Chamber of Commerce. And that is House Bill 433. It includes the heat preemption that you were talking about, which is just, in an era of climate change, is just an inhumane thing to do, to tell local governments that you can't require businesses to provide cool drinking water to farm workers and construction crews. But that's not all the bill did. It also, this is the bill that preempted living wage ordinances. So there are about something like 24 cities and counties, particularly in urban areas, that have these wages that require their contractors to pay a few dollars more than the minimum wage, right? Just, we're not talking about like insane amounts of money. I think in Miami it's like $18 an hour right now, you know? And again, this is for contractors only. This will invalidate all of those. There are something like 40,000 workers who will be affected by the loss of these living wage preemptions here. And that's still not all 433 did. It also preempted local governments from ever adopting what are known as fair work week laws. And there are none of these in Florida yet, but the chamber and the big business lobby has been trying to get out in front of them. And you've seen them adopted in, I think, Chicago, Seattle, a few other places. And they just require employers with lots of part-time and hourly employees that are on erratic schedules, many of whom are having to work multiple part-time jobs just to make ends meet. It requires them to give their employees their schedule 2 weeks in advance. That's all it does, but that is preempted, so you will never see a fair work week law in Florida. And just to tie a button on this, I think the most damning fact of this year's Florida legislative session was the very last two policy bills the legislature passed this year were House Bill 433, which is that one we just discussed with all those preemptions, and House Bill 49, which, hard to believe, weakened child labor laws in Florida.
Skyler.
Yeah, so as a news reporter, I got to be careful here in terms of what's the best bill and what's the worst. So I'm going to kind of turn to our opinion page, and I'll talk a little bit about kind of what our editorial board's been writing. In terms of one that they had a lot of concerns about, it was the ethics bill. And what happened there was to file an ethics complaint, you have to now have personal knowledge of the violation. So basically, you have to see someone, handing the bag with the $3 little bills on it over to the politician to file an ethics complaint. It can't be based on hearsay. You also can't self-initiate an investigation. And then we had a list of bills that we thought were good. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein grand jury testimony, that's going to be made public. So, hey, transparency there. Occupational license for felons so they can become, cosmetologists. We thought that was a good bill. Some more transparency with condo bills. I guess the most fun bill, maybe, we're going to have the Jimmy Buffett Memorial Highway. If you like his music, I guess you think that's a good bill. So that's kind of my list.
Well, Skyler, while you have the mic, why don't you explain to our audience my reference earlier to bears and the bear bill?
Okay, so this is like the stand your ground for bears, which apparently this is like a huge problem in North Florida. And so they came up with that you can shoot bears that come on your property. However, you cannot lure them onto your property with honey and then shoot the bear. So that was a sample of some of the discussion that was going on in Tallahassee this session.
Can I just make one point around the bill that sort of like illustrates the brain waves of the Florida legislature? So
that's assuming a lot, but go right ahead.
So the same two legislators that filed the Stand Your Ground for Bears bill also filed, they're from North Florida, and they said their communities are having interactions with bears are becoming a real problem, where they're coming onto residential property and stuff. So those same two legislators also filed budget requests to help these communities buy bear-resistant trash cans, right? And so the legislature passed the shooting bears bill, but they only funded the bear trash can stuff at half of what they asked for.
Well, but like, if we're honest, Jason, isn't a bear like the classic symbol of communism? And so if I understand it right, you can't lure a bear onto your property, but if the bear comes on the property, you can shoot and kill it. If you videotape yourself doing it, you can present that in the Americanism versus communism class of your personal stance in favor of Americanism and against communism. Will you all join me in thanking our presenters for their... If there are brave souls who want to ask questions, the microphone's open. Don't be shy. Come on up. As you can see, they have a pretty thorough knowledge of what's happening up there, so fire away.
Anybody that's a league member and would like to ask a question, we invite you to state your question. And when you come up, if you could state your name and ask a question. This is not comment session. Just state your name and your question.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Kelly Martinez-Semrad. Thank you for covering this important session. I might have to tuck my passion in a little bit when I ask my question, because I was the initiator of the Sustainable Growth Rule boundary for Orange County. I submitted that July 5th this past summer. That is an effort to manage and control the detrimental damage that urban sprawl brings. I also sued the county for urban sprawl in 2016 and prevailed in court for all of the damage that it causes in terms of our infrastructure, roadways, and everything. So here's my question. That language in that bill, so first of all, we know that those two sentences tacked onto that bill was a good bill, tacked on at the end, totally attacked Orange County citizens. That bill language, it says citizen-led initiated process, that we can't do it if it's a citizen-led. My question is, this came through the Charter Review Commission. That is not a citizen-led process. Those people are appointed. Citizen-led means that I go door to door, I knock, hey, can you sign this petition? Can you sign this petition? So I want to know, is that bill dead?
No, that bill is very much on its way to becoming
No,
law.
I'm sorry, not
Yeah.
is the bill dead. Is our rule boundary dead with that fuzzy, cryptic, crazy language?
That's more of a question for a lawyer, but that is clearly the intent of it. They didn't actually hide the intent when they slipped this amendment onto a Department of Commerce package on the floor of the Senate. They said this was aimed at Orange County. They are going to contend that a charter review commission, an appointed charter review commission, is a citizen-led body. Basically, the way they have described it in the very little conversation that they allowed to take place on this before passing it, is that this preempts anything that's not approved by the county commission itself. So now what you're describing, there may be a good litigation hook here where you could challenge that it does not apply to it, but it is clearly the intent of the legislature to block the Orange County rural boundary.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I'm Scott Hodenstein. I have a question about education legislation. Which governor is actually more powerful in education legislation, Jeb Bush or Ron DeSantis? And if you could comment with regards to the education deregulation bills and trying to fix universal vouchers, please. Thank you.
Well, let me just take the first part of that question, just because it happens to be something I've been looking at recently. Jeb Bush is absolutely the most powerful voice in education policy in Florida still through his, he's got a couple of nonprofits. The Foundation for Florida's Future is the operating name of one of them. More than half the funding of for that comes from the Walton family, the Walmart heirs. So almost every education policy you see go through the legislature, particularly as it relates to charters and choice, either originates from one of his foundations or is vetted through one of his foundations. I don't know if either of you guys want to talk on the policy.
Briefly, I'll just say I agree that of the governors, since I've been in the state of Florida in 1996, I would say that Jeb Bush was probably the most influential when it comes to public education and K-12 education. Although certainly Governor DeSantis and the Republican legislature over the last couple of years have done a lot, it's still living mostly in Jeb's world. He was the one that came up with this idea of vouchers. And of course, originally the courts sort of restricted it, but then over time they've been able to build and build and build. He was the one that came up with the idea of grading schools, grading students with letter grades, having more standardized tests. Somewhat interestingly, one of the things that didn't pass the session in the education bill, they said they were going to deregulate schools. Well, originally that deregulation was also going to do away with a lot of the testing and that sort of stuff. But in the end, he spoke out very strongly not to do that, and they did not. So.
Hi, I'm Barbara Lanning. My question is about all of the DEI measures. You seem to be greatly impacted by many of the laws that have been passed. I'm wondering how it affects you in your daily work, and I haven't heard as much about UCF as, for instance, of course, UF or some other schools. So how is UCF dealing with this, that it's more, it's less of an issue, or we're hearing less about it? I hope that doesn't get you in trouble with with your superiors.
I gotta think about what I say, and that's actually that's actually the answer to your question too. Is that on one level, I don't think that I have let these like the anti-woke legislation, anti-DEI legislation. I don't think I have let that affect what I teach and how I teach and the rapport I have with my students. I like to think that. But I do sometimes wonder if I'm thinking in the back of my head, like, okay, can I say this? Is this going to get some student ticked off? I do feel some comfort in that the original Anti-Woke Act that was aimed at colleges and universities and now businesses also seems like that's not going to be applied, right? The first federal judge said, no, that's dystopian, basically. Let's see, 2 or 3 other things. One, I can say, thank God I'm not sociology, right? Because they've been totally axed out of the core curriculum, so there's that. But one of the latest rules, though, does affect core courses. One of the core courses is American National Government. That's a course that I've taught many times in the past. They have created a classic catch-22 because they said that I cannot distort factual historical events, but they also tell me that I'm not allowed to ever say that American institutions had anything to do with structural or institutional racism. And so how I talk about the Constitution allowing slavery and the 3/5 clause and Jim Crow laws, but then not suggest that that also showed that there was institutional or structural racism in the United States, your guess is as good as mine. I don't know how we do that, but I do feel like the truth is the best defense, so if I stick to the factual, I'll stick to that part of the law. If I'm telling an accurate historical thing, then probably I won't get in trouble, hopefully. You know, we'll see. Hopefully not.
Last question.
My name is Jan Rickmer. I got 2 questions. The first one is just a funny one. Who's responsible for disposing of a bear if you shoot it on your property? And so, was there any money for that put in the bill? And second, I mean, you know, because I know there's the preemption on the wages and the workers' protection was not passed. Do you think the workers' rights groups, because I know the Farmer Workers Association really worked hard on this, do you think they have enough power, or the workers will stand up for themselves to keep these wages higher and go for the protections?
Real quick, the answer to the first question, Yogi? No, just, again, my history of Florida politics, going back the last 30 years now, I've been, 29 years at UCF, suggests that the labor movement in this state is pretty weak. And in some ways, unfortunately, getting weaker. I mean, the legislature's gone out of its way to try to weaken labor unions. Not all of them, the preferred ones like police and fire, and I'm not against police and firefighters, they're wonderful. But I do think that whatever laws are applied to the union organizing for them should be the same as other public employee unions, just as an example. But I don't think that the workers groups and union groups have much of a chance of challenging this in Tallahassee. The Florida Chamber and AIF are really just very influential.
Yeah, and I would just add to this. This is two points. One, this is one of the places preemption becomes so insidious because the Florida legislature is obviously insulated by these extremely gerrymandered districts. It is very difficult to influence all but, at a maximum 24 of the 160 legislative districts around the state, right? And so where you find unions and workers groups and others where they have the most impact is at the local level. That's how you end up passing these living wage ordinances. That's how you end up passing anti-discrimination ordinances, those sorts of things. And so these preemptions are designed to cut off that pathway to change when you're already cut off through the legislature by sort of anti-democratic means. And the other thing, just to speak to part of why unions are growing more weaker, I don't think people sort of quite realize just how dangerous or diabolical that anti-union bill they passed last year was. Again, the one they carved out police, fire, and prison guards because those unions endorsed Ron DeSantis' re-election and his presidential campaign. But for the rest of them, it did basically two main things. One, it said public sector unions, teachers, janitors, bus drivers, clerks, you can no longer pay your union dues by paycheck deduction, right? So basically, they made it harder to pay union dues, much harder to pay union dues. But at the same time as they did that, they required more union members to pay dues in order to keep the union. So now you have to have 60% of your members paying dues while making it much harder to pay dues in the first place, or else you lose the union. And that is entirely designed to weaken all these unions so they can't organize for change.
Yeah, and I'll just add
last
that,
comment, and then we're going to wrap up.
Yeah,
Skyler.
I totally agree with everything that was said, and I think if Republicans have a supermajority in the legislature, and you have business groups that give as much money to those lawmakers as they do, I think the power of unions to affect policy is going to be very limited.
So permit me to say this. We poked a little fun at our elected leaders because we wanted to make it entertaining and interesting to you. But I'd like to make this statement. Today, in today's environment, with social media, with political tribalism, with other factors, it takes tremendous courage to run for public office today. If you have ever been a candidate for elected office, if you currently serve, or if you're running for elected office, would you stand so we can thank you for your courage? All right, folks, we'll see you next year.
Hasn't this been a terrific and riveting discussion? Thank you to Judge Lauten, our moderator, our panelists, Skyler Swisher, Jason Garcia, and Dr. Jewett. You've been absolutely terrific. If you agree with me that what we've learned today is very important, I urge you to support journalism. And even though the rates have gone up, we urge you to continue to be subscribers or resubscribe to the Orlando Sentinel and Seeking Rents. Those are two excellent subscriptions in our area. If you know someone who says their vote doesn't matter, we suggest you point them to the Hot Topics program today. It will be posted on our social media post and very easy to find at our Hot Topics page. So help us counter that prevailing attitude among too many people. In the past 60 days, the Florida legislature has been busy. And in my opinion, each of us needs to do everything we can to speak out and to ensure that Tallahassee remembers that they are there to keep us, Floridians, our best interests at heart. These new laws will impact all Floridians. And if you like what lawmakers are doing, please thank them. If you do not like what they're doing, it's up to each of us to take action. So please do not sit back. Be a part of active member engagement here at the League. Do what you can with the League on your own to get people out to vote, to talk to your legislators, and to be active. We have at the League many ways that you can become engaged or become more engaged. I know many people in the audience are very engaged. If you are not, we are always looking for great volunteers to help us get out the message, to advocate, to educate, and to inform. Among our education and advocacy committees, I think we have 8, and we have many committee chairs here in the room. Will committee chairs of our advocacy committees please stand? Don't be shy. Gina Hall, our transportation committee. We have others. Please consider picking an advocacy area that is of interest to you. We need your support, we need your help, and we need your voice. If getting out and shaking the banner isn't your thing and you like more cerebral things, we have strategic committees. I love strategic committees. Among them are, if you can go to the strategic committees. There's no slide? Okay. Then I'll have to do it by memory. I'm in trouble. Communication, our DEIA committee, our member services and event planning committees, and of course, fund development. We're always looking for supporters and members. We're also actively looking for co-chairs for many of our committees. We know we have many leaders among our membership. Please join us to strengthen our voice in the League. We also encourage you to visit our website at lwvoc.org. At the top of the website is a button that says volunteer. It's an easy way for you to find out what is happening in the community among events that we're scheduling. And while we do have a core of volunteers who always are there for our activities, we always need more. We have the Adopt a Precinct activity coming up on the 19th of March for our local elections. And while we are all signed up, some of us signed up doing triple duty, like me. So we are looking for an extra volunteer for the Winter Park High School Adopt a Precinct location. I know that's probably within range for some of you where you live. If you're interested in helping deliver breakfast, an easy assignment. You just have to get up early. Please join me. I'll be doing that as well. We need an additional volunteer. And Mary DeBoy, where are you? Okay, Mary DeBoy is in charge of volunteers for that event. So please see her before you leave so that I can do less. We want to encourage everyone to take 2 minutes before you leave to fill out our evaluation. We sometimes run out. Typically it's been to go across the hall, but if you would just take 2 minutes, scan the QR code here that is on the screen. I think there's also a piece of paper on your tables. If you're not comfortable with the scanning, you can basically type in the link that's there. Please give us your feedback. We always want to continually improve what we do. And if you love what we're doing, we'd love to hear that as well. Before announcing our next Hot Topics, I want to take a moment to thank our terrific Hot Topics team for putting on all of the Hot Topics events, but especially this terrific event. Diana Smith, Karen Estrin. Will the Hot Topics team please stand? Charlie Behrens, Gloria Picard, Carol Wansavage, Susan Sussman, thank you so, so much. I also want to acknowledge and thank Cuisineurs, our caterer, the Winter Park Event Center. This is a great place to meet. And our videographer, who's doing absolutely a terrific job. So we are, I think, at the point where we're going to announce upcoming events. Okay. Our next event is on March 13th. We have a Zoom book club. You can find more about that on our webpage. On March 14th, there's a Women's History Month breakfast at the History Center in Orlando. Many of us will be attending. That's from 8 to 10. For our members, to help us advocate more effectively in our community, the League is sponsoring a free storytelling workshop to increase the power of us telling our League story. So please join us. You need to sign up on the webpage on March 29th, that's Friday, from 12:30 to 2. It'll be a terrific session. Our League annual meeting, this is a very important meeting, is in April 13th, from 9 to 12 at the Winter Park Community Center. Please join us for important updates about what we're doing in 2024, our budget, and where we're going. We'd love to have your ear and your voice at that meeting. The next Hot Topics, thank you, is April 10th. And it's going to be a good one. Please make sure you join us third Wednesday in April, same time, same station. Did I miss any announcements? I'm good. All righty. So if we are done, I think we are just about ready to tell you that we have enjoyed our time with you today. Thanks again to our wonderful panelists and moderator. And please join us again on the way out the door. If you haven't already voted, you still have an opportunity for early voting by just walking across the hall if you're a Winter Park resident. So thank you. Have a great day.